we need more and more and more skilled workers in this country. And we need to find ways to get people to understand that upskilling is an important thing, that mid-career transition is normal now.
How can a set of skills lead you down the path to success? That's what we're setting out to answer on the EdUp Canada podcast. I'm your host, Michael Sangster. Join me as we unpack how leaders around the world have taken training and skills and turned that into a lasting career. Now let's learn together. Welcome back to the EdUp Canada podcast. I'm live on Parliament Hill today with the Parliamentary Secretary in the federal government here, Member of Parliament from British Columbia, Taleeb Noormohamed, and we're looking forward to having a conversation. We had the chance to meet about a month ago with a few members of our board of directors. We got a chance to have a conversation about technology, AI, his career, but also to talk about recent budget, some of the things that are going on in Ottawa. We had a big vote last night here. So, Taleeb, why don't we just jump right in? Tell me about yourself, your career path, and you're a really neat story.
Sounds good. No, happy to share and glad to have you here and glad to be doing this. So look, my trajectory to politics is probably not the most conventional. I went to my undergrad, went to grad school, both outside of Canada, and then wanted to come back and do something meaningful at home, and got into building tech companies, and then very quickly, through a strange turn of events, ended up coming to work in the federal government. The plan was to come and spend a year in the federal
you worked
government.
in the Privy Council office.
That's right. The plan was to come and do a year before going back to finish my PhD at Oxford, and ended up getting sucked into a number of years of doing that. Helped to run the review of the bombing of Air India Flight 182, which was obviously one of the largest terrorist attacks in Canadian history. Really got an interesting insight into not just the working of government, but also particularly the national security side of things. And then from there, was called back home to Vancouver to become the Vice President of Strategy and Partnerships for the 2010 Olympics, which some would say is sort of the most unbelievable, incredible jobs you could ever have. And I come into the games at a time when, obviously, it's 2007, the financial crisis has hit us, sponsors are having a really, really hard time. And part of my job was to think about how we could work with other provinces and territories outside of British Columbia to make this truly a national initiative, make this Canada's Games. So I traveled from coast to coast to coast, getting other provinces and territories and others involved in the Games to help cover some of the costs, but also to tell a more Canadian story, and worked with folks in the private sector from across the country as we expanded that mandate. And had a bunch of other responsibilities along the way as part of the Olympic experience, whether it was medal ceremonies or VIP services, to the relationship with the IOC, relationship with foreign delegations, with certain types of sponsors. It was a huge remit, and it was the most exhilarating, finite term job you'd ever have. But the second that it was done, you knew it was over.
You were done, yeah.
And so then the question is, what do I want to do? Ended up going back into the tech world, helped to build some fairly large businesses, multi-billion-dollar companies that were global in scale, yet kept feeling like, well, what am I doing? How am I giving back? How am I making the world better through this? And I was doing volunteer work, and I was on boards and doing other things, but there was something that was just sort of, kind of calling me to do more. I was spending a lot of time in the U.S. going back and forth. There were these moments around what was happening with Donald Trump and sort of the way in which the political narrative was becoming extremely polarized that called me to ask the question, like, is that really where we want to end up in Canada? Can I be part of something that's a little bit more positive? How do we kind of reclaim the center of politics and get people to think a little bit more about politics, not just as a zero-sum game for everybody, but something more meaningful for the country, but in particular for Canadians. And so, obviously 2021, got elected. Very interesting time. From the moment that we got elected, there was something going on. So, of course, election during COVID, and then shortly thereafter, we had the wildfires in British Columbia. Then we had the flooding, and then we had the convoy in Ottawa. So the first year, and all of a sudden, this is like, you come to Ottawa.
Well, living in Ottawa,
right?
We remember that well.
Yeah. So we had the convoy in Ottawa, and then right after that, we had the war in Ukraine. and all this is going on. And that was in the first like 6-7 months of being elected. So a bit of a trial by fire. And then, of course, a very complicated 3 years before the last election. And yet some of the most meaningful work that you could do in giving back and helping to make some positive change for people.
So you're working with an old friend of mine, Evan Solomon, now, the minister. It's more than AI. What, digital innovation?
Yes, yeah, digital innovation.
Parliamentary secretary.
Yeah.
And he's an interesting guy, and he has sure gravitated to politics quickly.
Yes.
As you clearly have as well. How are you finding that work? Because with your tech background, you're very well suited to be around this new field.
Well, there's two things I would say. One is Evan is a great guy.
Yeah.
He's
a good guy just to be around.
He's wicked smart, very thoughtful, easy to get along with. We've become friends very quickly in a very short amount of time. And it's just a joy to work with him because he is incredibly intellectually curious, but he's also incredibly smart. And, there are people in politics who are, I would say, insecure and therefore don't ever want to, from all parties, people, that's a natural part of life, that aren't willing to hear other people or work with other people. And Evan is the opposite. Like, he is super collaborative. He is the kind of person that wants to take ideas, take thoughts, but also, make sure that people feel like they are part of something. And I think that's a really important trait in politics. So it's been really great working with him. And on the file, of course, look, I mean, as somebody who's built tech companies and who's, who knows the sector, knows the folks that want to invest in the space, it's been very satisfying to know that we have managed to sort of get through, right? The Prime Minister has been so keen on talking to the tech community, talking to entrepreneurs, talking to investors, talking to innovators. The fact that we've managed to get through the noise to a group of people that previously weren't really interested in talking to us, right? Like, they had, in the main, sort of abandoned or sort of didn't think that the Liberal Party or Liberal government was going to get the needs of the tech community. And sort of Evan's presence, the Prime Minister, but then also having somebody like me who knows them and has worked with them and has is part of that ecosystem, I think it's really helped. It's helped because the policies we put forward resonate, but then the people who are speaking the language around the work also are familiar, and there is conviction to it, right? We care about this. I would not have taken this role on had I not felt fundamentally that we were actually going to serve the needs of the sector in this country.
Well, I've been around this town for 30 plus years. I've seen a lot of parliamentary secretaries be successful because their minister, one, wants them to be successful, wants to work with them and give them some room to run. But it's also the people who have the courage to go try things and do things and take an ownership of things. And I think that's the partnership I'm seeing with you and Evan, is that he's not afraid to say, go do some things, be my partner in crime here, right? And that's the kind of guy he is.
Exactly.
So you're fortunate in that way.
No, totally. Absolutely.
Your personal story is very unique. Your family immigrated to Canada.
Correct, yeah. So my parents came, in their 20s.
The 20s.
Yeah, and then moved to Ottawa. They actually settled in Ottawa. And I was born here, not too far from where we are today.
Not from where we are right now.
Yeah, no, at Riverside Hospital. And then shortly thereafter, my dad was mom and dad both in the design business. Dad's an architect. Eventually ended up living in a couple places internationally and then coming back, but this time to Vancouver. So we came back to Vancouver when I was, we left when I was 3, came back when I was 9. And, grew up in Vancouver after that.
And that's the riding now. You've now won 3 elections or 2 elections? 2 elections.
Yeah.
And looking forward to a good run here, obviously, as we go forward. Talk about your riding. What are the main drivers in the economy there?
So my riding is very interesting. We have lots of amazing small businesses. We've got professional services, but we also have, I would say now, the heart of some of the most innovative businesses, companies that are becoming Canadian leaders, right? So you've got the AbCellera head offices in my riding, major biotech player, Aspect Biosystems, Sanctuary AI. You've got a number of others in tech, in health tech, in AI, in digital industries that are in the northern part of my riding, which used to be industrial, right? And so all of a sudden, over the last probably 5 or 6 years, all of these companies have started to grow and thrive. And then across the riding, you have more and more innovators like this that are just coming up out of nowhere, but really out of an incredible ecosystem that is being built almost under the radar. And it is really quite interesting to see, as a result, the way in which you have more and more communities of entrepreneurs that are in the community, that are living and working in the riding, which is really, really amazing.
So we look at training. I obviously represent a group of 550 career colleges, about 90 of them in British Columbia right now that are our members. We're doing a lot of cyber, a lot of IT training. When you live back to your old world and your conversations with tech companies now, biopharma, those kinds of places, what are the kinds of workers they're desperately looking for?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really interesting question because there are no shortages of lab techs. There are no shortage or need for lab techs. There's no shortage of people who can, who can program. There's no shortage of people who are able to build good infrastructure. There's no shortage of people who are, and the other thing I should say is my writing has, how could I forget this? My goodness, some of the, if not the largest cluster of health infrastructure in British Columbia is in my writing, right? So you got BC Cancer, you got the hospital, you got VGH, you got women's, you got children's, you've got,
all within your
all
writing?
the research, all within my writing. It's all there. And so you think about the
Tens
needs
of
there,
thousands
right?
of workers.
Thousands of people who are working in healthcare, who are all in extremely high demand. So there's lots and lots of jobs, again, in skilled workers around healthcare, right? So, I mean, you name it, when it comes to technical skill, when it comes to trades, when it comes to the career colleges that are producing some of the most in-demand folks, there are jobs for all of them in my writing.
So when we start talking to students, we start talking to employers, which we have a very close connectivity between our colleges and the employers, because in most provinces, we can't start a program until we can prove there's a job needed.
Yes.
From your own personal experience, I'm interested to hear what you think students should leave their education with, the skills that made you successful, make others successful, because it's not about the books entirely. It's about the experience. It's about the time spent with employers to learn how to work together. So I'm intrigued to think from your own perspective and your own career, what do you think are the skill sets that students should have when they leave education?
Yeah, I mean, there's the tangible thing that you have gone to learn, right? But I think it's the intangibles that make people employable and make people successful. I think the first is the ability to work with others, right? Knowing how to work with others. Regardless of what you do, you have to be able to be a good team player. So number one is the ability to work with others. Number two, I think, is the willingness to be agile, to be adaptable. When you're working particularly in sectors where there is so much change going on, you have to be willing to embrace change. You have to be willing to be a lifelong learner. If you assume that the day that you walk out of your college or your university or your trade program that you no longer have to learn, you've already lost. Right? Like, you have to be willing to be open to new horizons, open to finding new ways to do the work that you do, potentially looking at other careers down the line, because that's just the way the world is right now. But that comes with an openness and intellectual curiosity. And so I always say to people, if you've gone to school for X, make sure you do courses or learn something in a field that is totally different from you while you're there, while you have the option of doing that, so that, your mind is expanding. I think the third thing is a willingness to take some risk, right? When you're in a learning environment, you have the ability to take risk. You have the ability to say, I'm going to try something new, a little bit different. I'm going to push myself here. I'm going to take a risk and try to make friends with or be around people that are different from me. All of those, that risk-taking skill is hugely important when you get into the real world, because you want to be able to take intelligent, managed, thoughtful risk, right? Put yourself outside your comfort zone, but know what your boundaries are. And I think if those three things you'll always find a way to be successful.
I want to let you go on a bit of a riff here on AI.
Yeah.
Where this government's going, what you're thinking. There's a whole bunch of us around that are starting to learn how to play with it, but none of us know what we're doing yet.
Yeah.
I'm one of those. Talk to me about what you see. We talk about careers that are coming available, but I don't think any of us really know yet specifically what it's going to be. But where's this government headed? What are you thinking on AI?
Yeah, and I mean, you already see some of the careers that are coming out of the creation of AI. Like, they're prompt engineers now, right? Like, I didn't know what a prompt engineer was 5 years ago.
Because it didn't exist 5 years ago, right?
And so, exactly. And so, I think we are all trying to do three things. One is, and I say we are all as people, and then of course this translates into work that government does. One is trying to just make sense of the breadth and depth of what AI can do positively and what the risks are negatively, right? That you can't just assume that it's going to be all good for everybody. There are going to be challenges we have to deal with. And so how do you regulate? How do you manage it? How do you ensure that there are guardrails up in a way that doesn't stifle innovation, but also doesn't put humans at risk? So that's the first kind of question. The second is, how do you make sure in that context Canada is the global leader in AI. I mean, we have 3 AI institutes that are anchored by 3 of the brightest minds in AI in the world, right? You have Turing Prize winners that are here in this country that are doing some of the most incredible, innovative research on AI. And our job as government is to make sure that we are spurring that ecosystem, that we are giving the researchers the space that they need in order to be able to do the work that they do, that we are ensuring that the access to capital is there, that the access to compute power is there, compute capacity is there. So we're obviously working hard at that. And the third is to ensure that we're unlocking the capital that is required. So the third piece of then this is making sure the talent is also here. Like, how do we ensure that we have homegrown talent to be able to do the work that is needed? And how do we make sure that we are bringing to this country the most talented workers that we don't have, that have the skills that are required? And how do we take advantage of uncertainty in other parts of the world to attract that talent here, right? So if you have the compute power, you have the human capacity, and you have the capital, you can really do anything. And, we are right now fighting wars, trade wars on natural resources, on auto. You look at steel, you look at lumber in my home province of British Columbia around softwood. But there's a whole other world in tech, in digital, in quantum, in AI, where Canada has the ability to not just lead, but to remain and become the global leader. And government has an enabling role to play in that. Part of this budget is, of course, about enabling all of that innovation to then turn from just innovation to be commercialized, to become viable, which is one of the big challenges in this country. Like, we innovate really, really well, and then you go raise your capital elsewhere, move the company, and Canada's lost that IP. So our goal is to make sure that that doesn't happen. And, there's now $1 billion towards startup capital, towards venture, which is a big deal to incentivize the private sector to invest in Canada. There's $750 million for early stage. We're making it easier on the shred credits piece now, which is, obviously something that all us entrepreneurs used to scream about. But beyond that, I mean, the money that is going to go into dual use, that is going to really spur on innovators in tech, in quantum, in AI to be able to build great things is going to be unbelievable. And if done correctly, will put Canada on par or above anybody else in the G7, which I think is a very, very important aspiration for us to have, but also I think one that is in this space particularly attainable.
You touched on the immigration piece. We've got to consider that in anything we
Yes.
do. The government's doing a lot of work now around immigrating the workforce that's already trained, bringing in researchers, bringing in experts as well. But we've also had a little bit of noise over the last couple of years around international students and too high of immigration levels. We supported the government when they made their changes a few years ago that something needed to be done. It's caused a lot of drama, a lot of noise. We were only about 4.5% of the international students that were in this country at the time, but we need to get that right too. And I know you and I have chatted about this a little bit, the importance of getting the right balance between university, college, career training so that we build the workforce we need in this country. I don't know if you want to say anything on that topic.
Yeah, look, I have very, speaking as, point of view of one, I have very, very strong views on this. We are a country that does need people to come here to be able to grow, thrive, and help us, help our economy, but also to be with their families and to be part of the fabric of this country. But I also take a particularly hardline position on people who or organizations that seek to take advantage of our value of openness and our value of being welcoming. There are so many legitimate organizations, career colleges, universities that need.
We all have a role to play.
Right?
So we think
exactly.
We all have a role to play.
And that need foreign students, and because the ecosystem in this country needs those people to be here and to become part of Canada, to become society, to become citizens and to live here. But the degree to which a number of these organizations have propped up, I don't want to call them colleges because I think it does a disservice to your colleagues. These businesses have popped up that didn't really provide a good quality education, that as a result sort of took advantage of the system here. And the provinces do have a substantial amount of blame on this because they are obviously the ones that regulate.
Yep.
And we need to make that very, very clear that that the provinces, Ontario I think in particular, enabled some of this to happen. It led to everyone having to do a big rethink. And I think it's the right step. Like, we need to make sure that the legitimate career colleges, the legitimate colleges and universities in this country are able to be successful, that they are able to bring in the types of students that are going to learn and grow and thrive, and that they're going to take skills back to their countries and or contribute here in Canada.
The good change in the debate has been it's focused in on workforce development needs. It's focused in on the kind of immigration system that needs to drive the workforce we need. We all know we're going to have a massive worker shortage in this country. We're already seeing parts of it, but you just have to look at population curves to know we have a problem coming.
Yeah.
Statistics Canada had the best number I've seen is that we're going from 7 workers from every retiree to 2 by 2035.
Yeah.
We got a problem.
And that's 10 years. That's not a long time.
We got to fix it by bringing in people that want to be here, that want to work, and we got to all play a part in that. And we very specifically have not picked on other levels of education. We've all got our challenges in this debate. And I think we can leave it there. I want to kind of go back to you again.
Yeah.
We always talk to all of our guests about skills and mentors.
Yeah.
People who've affected their lives, because we believe in every level of education, there's those things you leave with.
Yeah.
I think you touched on the skills when you talked about adaptability.
Yeah.
But would you say that's one of your greatest skills in you being successful, or?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at my career, you've
jumped around.
You jumped around.
Good.
Yeah,
I've done similar things. It's not for everybody.
No, it's not for everybody. Look, you talk about people that have had an influence on you. I look at my parents, right? My parents, both incredibly well educated, had to come to Canada because that was where they had very difficult circumstances in East Africa. My mom's family is from Uganda, dad's family is from Kenya. Ended up coming to Canada because this was the right place for them, but also Canada would accept them. And they had landed here, and my dad's architecture degree was not recognized. So he had a choice. He could either say, I'm no longer going to practice architecture, or I'm going to find a way to reaccredit myself in this country. What he did was he said, look, I'm going to figure out a way to make this work. And what he actually ended up doing was having the program that he was in accredited. So it wasn't just about him getting accredited and then being able to do his work. He worked with the college here, with the RAIC, to get the University of Nairobi, where he graduated from, which was actually by all accounts the British program that the British had set up, which ordinarily would have been fully recognized.
Right.
To go and review that program and say, yes, in fact, this meets all the Canadian standards, so that for him and for everyone after him, they never had to go through the same thing. But while they were doing that, he's working 3 jobs, mom's working 2 jobs, she's 9 months pregnant with me and working, 2 jobs, 20 hours a day to make sure that they could support us. But what they taught me was resilience. What they taught me was that you make the best of the situation that you're in, because in this country, if you do that, you will have the chance to be successful. And so they did everything they possibly could to make life easier for my sister and for me. And then the responsibility that they and my grandparents gave us was then you figure out how you're going to give back to make life better for other people. So that adaptability and that resilience I learned from them. And then my other mentor, I would say, and this is Bob Ray, whom I've had the privilege to work with in a variety of different ways over the course of the last...
Timely with him leaving the UN yesterday.
The last 20 or so years, I've had the privilege of working with Bob on Air India, on other things. He actually sat on the board of my, one of my companies years ago. And curiosity, like asking tough questions, trying to look at problems differently, but with very good humor and with trying to figure out ways to work with people that are, have very difficult or different points of view. And just watching him do it was always a great thing, but also in very difficult circumstances, working with compassion and kindness and thoughtfulness. So I think I'm very lucky to have had folks like that in my life who have helped me see that there are ways to do things that you can achieve success without stepping on people along the way.
What a true public servant Bob Ray is.
Amazing guy.
And just having completed his term at the UN, I think it was yesterday or the day before.
Yeah, Friday was his last day,
what an interesting guy. We always like to have a little chuckle on the podcast when we can, and it reminds me of David Peterson's line, which to me is still one of the greatest political lines of all time. When he lost to Bob Ray, he walked up to the podium, I believe, and said, 38 days ago, this seemed like a really good idea.
There you go.
When he called the early election and lost to Bob Ray.
Yeah.
I have to have a little chuckle about that. But I've had the pleasure of having dinner with Bob at a couple of dinners and functions and so on. What a gentleman.
Yes,
what
absolutely.
a gentleman, and has served our nation well.
Yeah.
How are you enjoying it? It's been a while now, but now you're sitting around the table at the cabinet table as a parliamentary secretary. I always like to highlight this. At least your flights are direct home. But this is a grind every week.
It
back
is.
And forth.
It is. Look, it is rough every week. And when I have 2 young kids,
that's
so
tough.
I take the red eye back so I can do bedtime before I get on the plane. It's a grind. It takes its toll in a way that I don't think most people understand. But it's also every day. You walk in. to this office, you walk into the chamber, and you feel so privileged to be able to do it. It's, you're a kid in a candy store every single day because you're so lucky to be able to do it. You know that the things that you're doing are going to have an impact, positive or negative, on people's lives. But I think that I would say is that in the main, across all parties, the vast majority of people who get elected genuinely believe and genuinely feel that they are doing this to help other people.
Mm-hmm.
And so there are very good collegial relationships with people, from different parties. We don't talk about it as much as they used to in the old days, I guess. But I think that the thing that worries me the most, and I will say this because I think it's important, is there's a bit of a toxicity and there's a bit of a culture of our political adversaries are now our enemies. And even though we don't feel that way, there are forces at play that want us to behave that way. And I think that we all have to resist that. We have to push back really hard against it, because if we don't, there are going to be fewer and fewer and fewer good people that go into politics. And I'm going to give you one example. We had the vote on the budget just yesterday. There's one Conservative member of Parliament Shannon Stubbs, who is having major facial surgery, from what I understand. And so she's out of commission. And some of the conservative hard right commentators, the stuff they have said about her,
for missing a vote,
the stuff that they have said about her are just beyond reprehensible. And so the question is, when your own side, and I mean, liberals will do this to liberals, and Democrats do this to liberals. I mean, everyone wants ideological purity, right? But if you do that to people, then people are going to ask the question, why should I put myself on the line? Look, I have had a couple of credible death threats since I got elected, and all of us have these stories. It shouldn't be that way.
No.
We want good people to come into this, do good work, and to leave when they are no longer useful. And that's what we have to try and aspire to.
We all pine back to a day when things were different. There was some toxicity back in the day I worked around Parliament Hill, but I've heard a great argument for taking the cameras out of committee, because the committees have become incredibly politicized now, which is not needed when they used to do great work and great studies, and we're losing some of that. So I agree with you. We can get back to that. But I've had the fortune of being around the Hill for 30 plus years, and I haven't met a lot of people I don't like.
Yeah.
There is a bunch of people trying to serve who I might not agree with, I might disagree with vehemently.
Yeah.
But they have a point of view, and as long as they have a point of view, some of the bloc members have become, one became a friend, but some of them, I disagree with them vehemently, but they may have a logic behind their point of view, which I understand.
And you learn from that.
It's not what I believe, but I understand that.
Yeah.
And we need to get back to that respect. When I was on the Hill, there used to be a lot more sitting in the lobby.
Well, this
behind the drapes, chatting with each other, and that seems to have disappeared.
That has disappeared. I mean, you'll never see opposition members in the government lobby and vice versa.
Yeah,
in the old days, it used to be
all the time.
Look, yesterday I had lunch. In the middle of all this chaos, I had lunch with a buddy of mine who's a Conservative.
Good.
In the Parliamentary restaurant, or in the cafeteria for all to see. Tonight, I'm having dinner with a member from the bloc, because at the end of the day, we're all here trying to get things done. And if we can, we can find good humor in that, and we can respect each other through that process. That's what Canadians deserve.
Just a quick pivot here, and then I'll give you a chance to offer some last thoughts. But how lucky are you to represent Granville Island? It's in the riding, right? And the Granville Island Brewing Company, and my past chair would be very upset if I didn't mention the Granville Island Brewery, because it's one of our places to sit in Vancouver and then wander down to Taps for dinner. What a spot to be around. Is it right in the riding?
Vancouver, yeah. So Vancouver Granville, I would say, is probably the most interesting, and it's the prettiest riding in the country. Others will argue, and they're wrong. But look, you have Granville Island, which is like the gem of Vancouver, sitting there right on the water, with great restaurants, great artists, a beautiful market, lots of stuff for kids to do. But then you've got in the riding, you've got Kitts Point, you've got Queen Elizabeth Park. I've got Nat Bailey Stadium, the best ballpark in the country to watch a baseball game. We've got Hillcrest, the old Olympic curling venue.
Yeah.
I've got the Punjabi Market. I've got parts of Shaughnessy and Kerrisdale and Kitts, and it's just like you've got some of the most iconic neighborhoods in Vancouver all in one riding.
All right.
And to be able to represent those communities and the folks that live there is such a joy. It's a joy to be able to walk the entire riding or take public transit through the riding. Amazing restaurants, amazing diversity, incredible businesses. So I feel very lucky. Every MP says this, but I invite anyone to come to this riding and tell me that this is not the best riding in the country.
So before we sign off, anything else that you want to talk about, just what's going on in your world, or the politics of Ottawa, or just anything else you want to leave us with, or even a thought about your riding?
Thoughts on my writing, I have many. As I said, there's not much more to say than really the best writing in the country. The thing that I will leave you with this, because I think this is the work that you guys are so instrumental in doing, is that we need more and more and more skilled workers in this country, and we need to find ways to get people to understand that upskilling is an important thing, that mid-career transition is normal now, and to have people in their 20s and 30s and 40s coming back and saying, I need to learn a new skill, I need to maybe pivot careers, and to destigmatize that a little bit is something that we all need to figure out how to do. And I say this because I see people in my line of work come to me and say, I need to figure out what I'm doing with myself now. What I used to do no longer applies. I'm being replaced. I have not yet, thankfully, have anyone come to me and say I'm being replaced by AI, but I know that day will come at some point. But people are saying that as the job market changes, I too need to change, or I want to do something different. And I think finding ways to make that easier for people is a role that all of you and your members can certainly play. But I think all of us in government also have the opportunity to take advantage of that. To say, how do we give people confidence in being able to do something new?
And that has to come from partnership. It comes from government and industry. It comes from all levels of post-secondary working together, combining with high school and other levels of education. There is no right answer for all.
Yeah.
And that's what we always like to say. We know we have a role to play. Colleges have a role. Universities have a role to play.
Absolutely.
Small little training courses have a role to play for some as well, to pick up a skill and develop something. So I appreciate your words. I appreciate your service. I always like to finish every meeting I have on the Hill, but at least today in the podcast, to thank you for your service, because it is public service and it is taking you away from birthday parties and Christmas concerts and ballet recitals and different events that go on in people's lives. We've all been dragged away in our business careers because of something for a meeting when you would rather have been at the school thing.
Yeah.
So I appreciate your service. And with that, we'll leave this episode of the EdUp Canada podcast, and we'll be back to you again next week. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to another episode of the EdUp Canada podcast. We release new episodes regularly, so make sure you hit that subscribe button so you know when they are officially out. If you love this episode, please leave a 4- or 5-star review wherever you listen to your podcasts so that others can also discover how a set of skills can lead to success. Thanks for learning with us.